Okay, let's jump right into a really fascinating and, well, pretty challenging chapter from an ancient source today.
We're looking at 2 Kings chapter 21.
Exactly. And it gives this incredibly stark picture of two kings in Jerusalem.
Manasseh and Ammon.
Right. And the text lays out these dramatic consequences that it says unfolded because of what they did.
So our goal here in this deep dive is really just to unpack their reigns, Manasseh's and his son Ammon's, using only the details that this specific chapter, 2 Kings 21, gives us.
Yeah, and try to understand what this text highlights. What does it see as significant about their time on the throne and, the impact it had?
And what's really striking from the get-go is how the chapter frames these reigns. It's not just a neutral historical account.
No, not at all.
It's a powerful narrative, and it explicitly links specific actions, mostly religious or cultic practices, directly to the fate of the kingdom. It sets that tone immediately.
Absolutely. And the spotlight falls straight onto Manasseh first. The text tells us he was incredibly just 12 years old when he became king.
12. That's really young.
And yet he reigned for a remarkably long time, 55 years in Jerusalem. We even get his mother's name, Hepzibah.
And the very next thing the text says, right after his age and reign length, kind of sets the stage for everything else. It says he did evil in the eyes of the Lord. That's the primary lens.
That's the headline for his entire 55 years, according to this chapter. It's not just a footnote.
Not at all. And the text immediately elaborates on why it makes that judgment. It lists what it terms his detestable practices.
Practices, it notes, that were supposedly the reason the previous inhabitants of the land were driven out.
Exactly. And this list, it's quite specific. It gives you a clear idea of what the text considers a major break from the required worship practices.
So what's on the list?
Well, first, he rebuilt the high places. These are like local worship sites, maybe on hills.
Well, ones his own father, Hezekiah, had actually destroyed as part of reforms mentioned earlier in Kings.
Right. So it's a direct undoing of his father's actions. Then it says he put up altars for Baal.
A major Canaanite deity.
Yes. And made an Asherah pole that's often associated with Baal, or a goddess figure.
And the text even throws in a specific comparison here about the Asherah pole, doesn't it?
It does. It says he did this as Ahab, king of Israel, had done.
And within this narrative tradition, comparing someone to Ahab is, well, it's not a compliment.
Definitely not.
No.
Ahab is portrayed elsewhere as sort of the prime example of leading Israel into idolatry. So that comparison carries a lot of weight here.
What else?
It broadens out. He's described as bowing down to and worshiping all the starry hosts.
So like celestial bodies, astrology maybe?
Possibly. Worship directed towards stars, planets. Again, presented here as completely out of bounds. And then, maybe the most shocking part, given the context of the temple.
He built altars inside the tent.
Inside the temple of the Lord itself. The very place the text emphasizes the Lord had chosen to put his name.
Not just in Jerusalem somewhere, but in the actual temple courts.
Yeah.
That's portrayed as a huge violation.
A profound desecration, according to this perspective, built altars to these other entities right there.
And the list of things the text condemns keeps going. It gets even darker.
It does. It mentions practices that sound incredibly harsh to us. It states he sacrificed his own son in the fire.
Wow. That's presented just matter-of-factly alongside the religious practices.
It really ramps up the sense of condemnation in the text. It also lists things like practicing sorcery and divination.
And consulting mediums and spiritists. So a whole range of activities seen as illegitimate ways of seeking knowledge or power.
Right. And the text sort of summarizes this whole section by saying he did much evil, provoking him, the Lord, to anger.
And it circles back, almost for emphasis, to that Asherah pole again.
Yes, it specifically says he put the carved Asherah pole he had made in the temple. It really hammers home that idea of bringing these forbidden things into the most sacred space.
Now, what's interesting is how the text then immediately connects all this back to something earlier.
You mean the covenant?
Yeah, it references a condition given way back to David and Solomon about the temple and the land. It says the promise was that the Israelites wouldn't be exiled if they were careful to obey the law given through Moses.
Exactly. It sets up this standard, this conditional promise, and then the text delivers the punchline from Manasseh's era.
But the people did not listen, plain and simple.
It puts responsibility on the people, too, not solely on the king.
True, but it does assign Manasseh a huge role in that failure. It says he led them astray.
Actively misled them.
To the point where Judah did more evil than the nations the Lord had destroyed before the Israelites. Think about that framing.
It's a powerful claim. that under his leadership, they surpassed the perceived wickedness of the groups the narrative says were displaced for that very reason.
It's building a case, isn't it?
Mm.
Listing the actions, showing the influence, stating the failure to meet the condition.
Absolutely. It's all leading towards the consequences. And that's where the text goes next, describing the Lord speaking through prophets.
Pronouncing judgment. And the language here is, well, it's intense.
Very vivid. The Lord declares through the prophets that Manasseh committed these detestable sins, has done more evil than the Amorites, and crucially has led Judah into sin with his idols.
And the predicted resolve.
Is described with some really striking imagery. First, I am going to bring such disaster on Jerusalem and Judah that the ears of everyone who hears of it will tingle.
Ears will tingle. That just jumps off the page. You can almost feel the shockwaves.
It conveys the sense of absolute horrifying disbelief at the news of the disaster.
And there are other metaphors too, right? Like construction or demolition tools.
Yes, the text says the Lord will stretch out over Jerusalem the measuring line used against Samaria and the plumb line used against the house of Ahab.
So invoking past judgments,
Hmm.
Samaria, Ahab, figures and places that in this narrative face destruction for similar perceived offenses.
Exactly. It's saying that same standard, that same level of judgment is now coming here to Jerusalem.
And then there's that unforgettable image.
This
Yeah. I will wipe out Jerusalem as one wipes a dish, wiping it and turning it upside down.
It's so mundane, yet so devastating. Not just breaking it, but wiping it completely clean, emptying it out, turning it over. Total obliteration.
It implies a complete reset, leaving nothing as it was.
And the text spells out the consequence. Forsaking the people, the remnant of my inheritance, handing them over to their enemies.
To be looted and plundered.
And it loops back again to the reason, grounding it in a long history. They'd done evil and provoked anger from the day their forefathers came out of Egypt until this day.
So Manasseh's reign isn't just a bad patch. It's presented as the tipping point, the culmination.
The final straw in this narrative's view.
Hmm.
And there's one more detail added to Manasseh's account, almost as an aside, but just as damning.
Right, after all the religious stuff.
It says, moreover, Manasseh also shed so much innocent blood that he filled Jerusalem from end to end.
So widespread violence and bloodshed too, on top of everything else.
Besides the sin that he had caused Judah to commit, it adds. So the text layers political violence or judicial murders on top of the religious transgressions.
Filling the city with blood. It's another really graphic image.
The text does mention, as it often does, that other events and sins of Manasseh's long reign are written in the Book of the Annals of the Kings of Judah, a nod to other records.
Okay, so after this very long and, according to this chapter, very damaging reign, Manasseh dies.
He rested with his fathers, as the phrase goes, and was buried in his palace garden, the Garden of Uzzah.
And his son, Amon, succeeds him.
Right. Which brings us to the second king in this chapter. Amon's account is much shorter.
How old was he?
22 when he began to reign, and he was only on the throne for 2 years, much shorter than his father's 55.
And his mother's name is given too. Meshulameth, daughter of Haruz from Jotbah.
And the chapter immediately draws the parallel to his father. The first description of his reign is,
He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, as his father Manasseh had done. No ambiguity there.
none at all. The text makes it explicit. He walked in all the ways of his father. He worshipped the idols his father had worshipped and bowed down to them.
So no new innovations in evil, just continuation.
Exactly. The text portrays him as simply following the template Manasseh had set, no course correction.
And the summary of his reign is equally blunt.
He forsook the Lord and did not walk in the way of the Lord. Just a direct echo of his father's path, as described here.
But his end is very different and much quicker.
Yes, after only 2 years, the text says his own officials conspired against him and assassinated the king in his palace.
An inside job. But then there's another twist right after.
There is. The people of the land, it says, reacted against the assassins.
They killed all who had plotted against King Amon.
So a popular uprising, maybe, or at least an action by the broader populace or landowners against the court conspiracy.
And then they made Josiah, Amon's son, king in his place.
Interesting sequence. The coup fails in a sense, or at least the conspirators are eliminated, and the Davidic line is restored with Josiah.
Like with Manasseh, it mentions Amon's other acts are in the annals.
Right, and it tells us he was buried in his grave in the Garden of Uzzah.
Same place as his father Manasseh.
And it confirms Josiah, his son, succeeded him.
Okay, so taking these two reigns together, as this chapter presents them, what's the main thread?
The overwhelming thread is that both kings are primarily evaluated on their religious fidelity or lack thereof. Both are summed up as doing evil in the eyes of the Lord.
And that evil is defined very specifically. Idolatry, pagan altars, forsaking the Lord's worship, following the practices condemned in Manasseh's reign. Amon just continues it.
We see the sheer scale and detail of Manasseh's actions over his long reign, laid out as the primary cause for the coming judgment.
Whereas Amon's reign is short, described as more of the same, and ends violently, though not directly through the divine judgment described earlier. That's aimed at the kingdom itself.
And the chapter hammers home this cause and effect. It's unequivocal in its perspective.
The actions of these kings, leading the people astray,
Directly result, according to this text, in the pronounced doom for Jerusalem and Judah. The wiping of the dish, the tingling ears, the exile.
So the chapter is really selective in what it focuses on, isn't it? It's prioritizing religious and moral conduct as it defines it, above all else in judging these kings.
Absolutely. The criteria for evil are crystal clear. Rebuilding high places, Baal and Asherah worship, desecrating the temple, child sacrifice, divination, bloodshed.
Which really brings us back to you, the listener. When you look at the specific details, this chapter chooses to emphasize things like sacrificing a son, filling Jerusalem with blood, that image of wiping the dish. What does that tell you?
What does it reveal about the perspective, the core message of this ancient text concerning leadership? What does it value? What does it see as ultimate failure? And what does it see as accountability?
It's definitely not just a dry chronicle of events. It's interpreting everything through a very specific theological lens.
Right. So wrapping up our deep dive into 2 Kings 21, we've traced the accounts of Manasseh and Amon based only on what this chapter tells us.
We've seen the text's vivid descriptions of their actions labeled evil, and the really severe metaphorical consequences tied directly to them.
This chapter draws an explicit, unbroken line from the king's practices, their perceived rejection of the covenant, their idolatry, straight to the predicted fate of the kingdom. Judgment is portrayed as inevitable because of these actions.
So maybe a final thought for you to consider, based purely on this text. Given this portrayal of Manasseh and Amon and the harsh judgment described as following their reigns, what does this chapter ultimately suggest is the cost?
The cost of leadership that, from the text perspective, departs so radically from the established ways. And what might it imply about the long-term impact, the ripple effect of choices made by those in power on the entire community they lead?